Hi, and thanks so much for joining us on the Sierra Bible Church Sermon of the Week. We hope you enjoy this message by Pastor Nate Levering.
Interesting thing to say and sing, right? In Jesus alone. In some ways, it's kind of where we're going. How do we get our hearts there? I want to kind of start by inviting us into even just this idea of what do we do when I stand up here for a few minutes? What are we hoping kind of happens? And especially if you're newer to Sierra Bible Church, we love that you're visiting or you're checking this out, or maybe you're taking a look at what, religion might look like or Jesus might look like. And so I want to kind of start by that. And, this hit me when I was about 4 floors down into God's Good Earth a couple weeks ago at what's called the Ground Zero Memorial. So some of you guys have been there. It's actually 7 floors down when you get to the bottom, but about 4 floors down or so, you see this picture. And of course, as a almost 2-year-old, I lived through this event with Kathy that morning from a very, very, other side of the world kind of way. Nothing like those that lived through it in New York or those that were in the building or on the planes. But there's artwork like this that sort of captures, right, this moment that draws us in, tells us something about what happened in this small season of life here on earth. And then as you walk through, if you choose to, as we did with our 2 young boys, it's an amazing opportunity to put on the headphones or go on the tour and spend a couple to 3 hours kind of walking through what brought our world into that specific season of life and where things have come from. You begin to see how a story, alongside a number of other stories, actually paints a picture oftentimes, right, to a much larger story. And so it just kind of got me thinking that in some ways this is part of what we hope happens when we gather and oftentimes look at one particular story in God's bigger story. That maybe we're at a feast, or maybe we're on the road, or maybe we're in the midst of some chaos that's really somebody else's story. But when those thousands of stories in God's story are put together, not only do we see that He's writing this incredible narrative, but we begin to see that people like me and Tana and Jack and Brian can find our story within His bigger story. And so this book really tells a story. It's a story of a people of which you and I are written in too. It starts, of course, with this incredible good God that blesses this world. Things go south and break apart and shatter. God spends then the bulk of the thousands of stories within this bigger story, putting it back together, this kind of mess. And then at the very end, you get this picture of like, this is where it's going. Not a lot, but enough to kind of anchor us to a very real hope that is shown us in the person and work of Jesus alone. This entire story, if you were to start the back and read to the left, if you were to start at the beginning and read to the right, all point to one particular season in human history that actually becomes, for all mankind, the hinge on which human history turns. At least it claims that. And I would argue that while this sort of season and time that we celebrate around this particular Sunday and these weekends, known around here as Easter, is not simply the hinge on which all of human history turns, but it's the hinge on which my history turns. It's what I do with what happened during this particular time that changes everything, that invites me to be a particular kind of participant in the work God is doing in His world. And so we're going to look at one of those stories, but I thought first we'd maybe just take a quick look at somebody's artistic rendition of the particular story we're going to look at. This story is familiar to many of us. It actually happens maybe a week or so prior to what we call Good Friday. So right around now, just before the sort of triumphal entry and the things we would celebrate as a part of this particular weekend. Jesus and his disciples are on the way up to Jerusalem, and they stop by this small town called Bethany, some 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, on their way up to Jerusalem, where Jesus would be the hinge for all of human history and mine as well. This story has some particular characters in it, and you might see Jesus over here. He's got this blue in her rendition. There are some people serving. There's this gal over here at his feet. There are a number of people around the table. What we'll discover in the story is that many of the people around the story are Jesus' closest disciples. They're actually journeying with him on their way up to Jerusalem. There are other characters at this table. This is Simon the leper's table, we're told. 3 of our Gospels tell this story, Matthew, Mark, and John. And so we're going to walk through some of the details of this particular dinner party. 3 of these characters, like the disciples, are key to understanding the story and what's happening here. Their names are Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Some of you may know them. Mary and Martha get quite a bit of ink even throughout the story because they're the ones where Mary's always at Jesus' feet and Martha's always running around serving. They also get some ink just maybe a couple of weeks prior to this dinner party because this guy Lazarus gets really, really sick. Mary and Martha, we're going to look at this story next week on Easter morning, send for Jesus to come help out Lazarus. And eventually Lazarus gets really dead. They throw him in the wrong side of the tomb. Jesus shows up, spoiler alert for next week, raises him. And now it's been a couple weeks and there's a dinner party, probably in Jesus' honor, in Bethany, celebrating what he had done for those in that town. And Lazarus is at the table. So we have these various characters, but beyond kind of where this takes place or who's in the room is the when. It's what's about to happen. It's where's Jesus taking those that sit at the table. When does this happen? Because, as was mentioned, in a few short days, Jesus would leave this dinner party. He would make his way up to Jerusalem, where he would be killed after being tortured as a criminal on probably the most harsh kind of death. He would be beaten and tortured. The scriptures tell us beyond recognition. He would eventually lose so much blood and be so exhausted that he couldn't hold himself up to get a breath inside his lungs. This is the way people died on the Roman cross. Because as long as you have the strength, you could prop your body up against that wood structure, breathe in, and continue to live. But eventually you would give out and die of asphyxiation. This is where Jesus is going. Calvary, where they're going, outside of Jerusalem, wasn't simply dark because of Jesus' physical death. It was dark and darker still because of the spiritual death. Because what Jesus is doing in the hinge of all history, and mine as well, is becoming the place on which all of human sin, the cause of all this brokenness and the stuff we try and navigate through in the midst of our real lives, finds its punishment. Goes so far, right? Many of us know the text, and Jesus on the cross. We'll look at this Friday night if you join us. When Jesus says, it's finished, it's done, I've paid for it, I've borne the weight of your sin. And so it's both physically dark, but much more so spiritually dark. It's Jesus' death on a cross. Jesus is, maybe some of us would know as we look through the stories, is constantly inviting the people in the story and us as well to understand what he's going to do. Some get it, as we'll see, some clearly not so much. Now, if you have a Bible open, I want to look at 3 quick texts in the book of Mark. And then we're going to kind of start our story in John. But like I said, it's a short story, this table gathering, and we're going to look at a number of books to kind of piece together the details of that particular story. So, sometime before they eventually make their way into Bethany, just prior to Jesus going into Jerusalem, Jesus is getting his closest disciples ready. He's preparing them. He's saying to them, saying to us, don't miss this. Don't miss this. Maybe this is another Sunday. Maybe this is another Easter. And maybe we would position ourselves in the story and hear from Jesus, don't miss this. Don't miss what I'm about to do. Don't miss what I have done. Mark chapter 8, sections where Jesus does this in verse 31. Mark chapter 8, verse 31, he, that is Jesus, begins to teach them, the disciples, that the Son of Man, this is Jesus' most common way of referring to himself. They would have known he's referring to himself. He uses it throughout the Gospels, recorded over 85 times. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law in that statement. And that he must be killed. And each time, Jesus will say then this same conclusion. After his death, there will be life again. After 3 days, he, the Son of Man, will rise again. Jesus didn't dress this language up. He didn't tell it in a parable. He didn't start with some other. He simply, we're told by Mark, said it, spoke it plainly. Get this. Peter, having very little idea of what Jesus was talking about, took him aside and began to rebuke him. If you flip over to the other side of the page, if you happen to have my Bible, chapter 9, verse 31, Jesus again is teaching his disciples. Some more time has gone on. Jesus says to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him. What's going to happen after his death? There will be life. 3 days later, I will rise again. They didn't understand, again, what he meant, but Peter tried it, and so the rest of them are like, I think we're going to kind of hold it quiet. Let's see. Maybe he's going to teach us what he means by these strange words. We flip over to chapter 10. Some more time has gone on. They've seen who Jesus is claiming to be again and again. And in verse 32, we get the turn. This is this last journey up to Jerusalem, whereby our dinner party finds its context. They are on their way up to Jerusalem. Picture this, with Jesus leading the way. The disciples, we're told, were astonished. Why? Because they're finally going. They're finally moving to the place where Jesus will be the rightful king of the world, where Israel will find its place, its freedom from all that Rome was. Here they are, they're astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, Jesus takes the 12 aside. Don't miss this. And he told them what was going to happen. We are going up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man, a.k.a. me, will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. Are you with me yet? 3 days later, though, the Son of Man will rise. I'm coming back. There's more to the story, but this is central to the story. Don't miss the opportunity to tie your life to my death. Don't miss it, Jesus says. Don't make this about another Easter. Do they get it? Of course not. They're like us. I mean, the disciples, right? Just after the section in John 10, if you read forward, they lean into Jesus and they're like, Jesus, we got one request. Here's our request. We want you to do for us whatever we ask. 3 genies, Jesus. 3 wishes, Jesus. And Jesus is like, what do you want? And James and John, private from the other disciples, respond with, some of you know this language, we'd like to sit at the right hand and the left hand when you eventually find your place as the world's rightful king. That's our spot. That's our position. We're with you, Jesus. We're going to go the distance. That's where we'd like to be. We're told as they make their way up and even maybe are in the upper room. When Jesus gets bread and breaks it and says, this represents my body that's broken. I'm going to break my body open for you. And then he shares a cup of wine. And as they're sharing that cup, he said, this represents my blood that will be spilt because you're such good sinners. And what we're told the conversation at the table is what? Who gets to be first? Where do we get to sit at the table? And I think for most of us, we have parts of that tied to our story. Jesus, I'm all in as long as I get to look good. I'm all in as long as you take care of my family. I'm all in as long. There's another position. Now, if you were to walk in and see a king, and you were to see a person sitting to the right and to the left, you would know that those two people are with that king. They've sworn allegiance. They've got his back. They're on his team. And they're saying, Jesus, we're all in with you. There's another position, especially in their day, that would declare the same truth. And it's the position of humility at the feet of the king. The question this story is going to invite us into is, which is our position? Are we with Jesus because of what he's going to give us and where we get to sit? Or have we found ourselves, as we're invited to, at his feet, saying, he is my Lord? There's two positions, and we see them both coming together in this story as we watch all of human history invite our story to be a part of that. So let's pick up the story. This is John chapter 1. We're going to look at some of the details from the other pieces, but I want to do a little bit of a setup so you get some context there. So Jesus, he's on his way up to Jerusalem. He's leading the way, as we learned in Mark. They stop in Bethany, where Lazarus has lived. Also where Lazarus has died, and where Lazarus is back living again, whom Jesus has raised from the dead. Here, a dinner party. This is a dinner party we know from the other Gospels, at Simon the leper's home, which of course is at least a little bit interesting because in that day you did not gather at a leper's home unless he was only previously a leper. This Simon had probably run in to Jesus. This dinner party was probably a celebration for the power and the promise of who Jesus was. And so he's hosting them in his home. Martha served, because Martha serves. That's her response to who Jesus is and how God's made her in all kinds of different ways. Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Now just imagine for a second pulling up the chair, really you're reclining on the floor next to Lazarus. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm like, okay, how am I going to, okay, I got it. Maybe you're just like, boop, like, is he really there? Like, I saw the tomb. I heard those that were crying and wailing. Like, tell me, Lazarus is in the corner. He's like signing his book deals, right? The 4 days I spent on the other side or whatever, right? I mean, this stuff's really happening in their midst, and Jesus is inviting them in, not to Lazarus' story, but to see your story in light of the story that God is writing in all of human history. It gets better. Verse 3, then we see that there's not just Martha there and not just Lazarus there, the brother and sister, but the sister Mary is there as well. She takes out a pint. We're told this is somewhere between 16 and 32 ounces of pure nard. This is one of, if not the most valuable oils that could be attained. And it's nard because it came from a flower called a spikenard flower, which I know most of you probably understand, as I didn't until I looked into it, that it comes from the sort of lower valleys of the Himalayas. So it's gotten all the way there. It's extremely expensive. And Mary has it. Most people would say that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, as well as most people that lived in Bethany, Bethany means the house of the poor or house of poverty, were very poor. We see in their story throughout the Gospels that this is a sister, and a brother living together, probably no mom and dad, trying to just sort out what life looks like. And yet Mary, shows up at the party with one of the most expensive, extravagant kinds of oil and a lot of it. We're told then in Mark's retelling of this same story that in the midst of this, she doesn't just pour the perfume on his feet and his head, but she breaks the jar and pours the perfume on Jesus' head. She then, in John's retelling of the story, pours it on Jesus' feet. She wipes his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. There wasn't one person after this happened that was sitting at that table that wasn't somewhat shocked, who didn't somewhere say, what is actually happening? Why this? Why this much? You're crazy. Why would you? What are you? And we see it unfold because of the extravagance of Mary's response to who Jesus is. Now, there's more going on, and he's going to tie the story together. But as I was kind of asking myself, what would it look like for us in that place deep inside our hearts to make this same kind of humble sacrifice, to be all in, all the chips? Don't you ask yourself sometimes, like, am I there? Like, God, am I there? And I was thinking about this in light of maybe making up a story about an engagement. So imagine this, that you have a 20-year-old daughter, and you're out, kind of working in your yard one day, and your daughter's high school boyfriend drives up the driveway driving this. Right? Maybe you don't have to imagine that far out, because you maybe got run off the road almost by one of those on the way here. So he pulls up, and he says, father of this woman, young woman, I'm here because I would like to ask her hand in marriage. But before I do that, I would like your blessing. Now, he's a hardworking man. He even heard from the story that he paid this beast off cash because he's just a hard worker, man. He has a lot of the things, ticks the boxes. And he says, I do need to let you know that I went out and bought this great truck, and because I had to spend everything I earned on the truck, I don't have any money left for a wedding ring at this point. And so I'd like your blessing to marry your daughter without a wedding ring, but I'm going to drive her around in my new truck, and she's going to look really good. Dad. All right, so what's Dad say then? So imagine Dad then responding and saying, I know you love my daughter. I know you love the Lord. I know you're lots of the things that, we want in a son-in-law. And I'd love to give you my blessing to marry my daughter. But I just have a couple things. One is, you have to go sell your truck. And when you get the $100,000 that thing cost back, plus the 30% you just lost pulling off the lot, I want you to buy my daughter a wedding ring. And then I want you to give the rest of that money into an IRA or whatever you need for my grandkids' college fund. And one last thing, I want you to drive around for the first 5 years of your marriage in this. Now, if you're a Prius driver, God bless you. Hopefully yours isn't a second generation Prius, because that's like the ugliest car I think I could ever imagine. But what Mary did was of such an extreme extravagance that it cost her everything. This was not a rich woman. Most people think the only way she could have come into this kind of a possession is because it was given to her. And it came with such humility. Here's a woman. I mean, quite frankly, if she deserves to be at this table at all, she deserves to be serving at this table in this day. If she deserves to be at this table, she deserves to be serving, and she then would be required to keep her hair up. And what is Mary doing? She's breaking a bottle, she's spilling oil, she's smelling up the place. in some extravagant, humiliating kind of way. Her hair is down, wiping the feet of Jesus with her hair. She's all in. She's not worried about what the disciples are thinking. She's caught up with the reality of who this is. The disciples don't get it. Give us the right seat. Give us the left seat. Here's Mary. She's broken open everything she has. She's poured it over her Savior's feet. And she's wiping them with her hair. It's such an incredible picture of what Jesus invites us to look like in our stories. Let's continue to look at the details of the story, not this beautiful car. Matthew 26 tells us this. When the disciples saw this, they watched Mary do this. They're indignant. So they're beyond curious. They're ticked off. They're like, what is happening? Why this waste? They asked. As we'll see, this is an expensive item. This perfume you could have sold at a high price, and the money could have been given to the poor. This, of course, is one of the priorities of Jesus' ministry. Still continues to be for the ministry he does in and through us. Next slide. We see then back in John chapter 12, one of the disciples, he gets named, Judas Iscariot, who plays a big part in this next week in the life of Jesus, because he's later to betray Jesus, objects to Mary as well and says this, why wasn't this perfume sold? Why wasn't the money given to the poor? I mean, this is enough oil that would cover an entire year's of wages. Like, why? And so we might ask ourselves, if we were there, what they're saying by their anger, by their just being upset, by why this waste? I thought about a couple different things that maybe, I would have said in that moment, not understanding the bigger story of what God is doing in all of redemptive history. Here's one of those things. I think many of them are saying this, get up off the ground. Like, get a grip of yourself. Get up. You look silly. This is no place for you. Put your hair up. Find the rightful place. Now, for Jesus, this is a bold reminder that he invites every single one of us to find ourselves with him at the table. Just cover your hair. You look ridiculous. I might argue, at least this is true in my story, that if there are not times in my life where, frankly, I look ridiculous, that maybe I'm not living in an all-in kind of way. And in fact, today we're going to invite you to take a little bottle home. And we're going to invite you to come Friday night for our Good Friday time together and bring it back. But we want to give you a bottle, and you'll get handed this on your way out, to sort of just ask yourself the question, what's my thing? What is it that maybe God is asking me to break open? What is it that I keep in there that it would be ridiculous if I gave this up? It would grate against all the other stuff in me unless I'm seeing Jesus for who he is. I think some of what the disciples are saying is this. Nobody asked you to do this. Nobody asked you to do this. You don't have to. You don't have to break it open. But it's a powerful statement when you watch it happen. Because something was going on in her. She wasn't reading a law. It wasn't like checking something off the list. She understood who Jesus was and what Jesus was about to do. And it just made sense to her. And there's some in our journey with Jesus where it doesn't make sense to other people. But you know what? This is him speaking to me. Because I found myself at his feet. And he's saying, I want you to be there and bring what you have and be willing to spill it out and let me work with it. What we see then is that the disciples respond harshly to him. They're like, harshly to her. Everyone at this point in the story has called Jesus out. Everyone has become the critic except for Jesus. Jesus has not yet spoken. And if you can put yourself in her shoes, like, what is Jesus going to say? What does Jesus think? Does Jesus agree with the disciples? Did I get it wrong? Yeah, I guess this is kind of weird. Man, maybe this kind of response does feel a little bit over the top for the moment. And she had to be thinking those kinds of things in her humanity until what we see is Jesus' response. Aware of this, aware of the tenor in the room, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman?" And then hear these next words. "She has done a beautiful thing." She's done a beautiful thing to me. When she poured this perfume, here's the big story colliding with the small story. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for my burial. You see, Mary's learned to tie her life, Jesus says, to my death. That life will be found on the other side of my death. This is in the story over and over and over. And Jesus says it over and over and over because he doesn't want people like you and I and people like the disciples to miss it. He wants us to figure out, what does it look like to tie my real life to his death? And there's a couple things that will happen when we get ourselves there. The first is a willingness to give up our pride, which is going to cause us, I think, as we've mentioned at times, to look a little bit ridiculous. It's just gonna. It's just part of the gig. Welcome to the team. Jesus people are going to look a little crazy at times. This is her time, and she has other ones like it. But here's the beauty. I think in every one of us, as we struggle with our own kind of insecurities, has a longing for the freedom to look ridiculous in a crowd and not know it. Because they're no longer worried about the price. They're no longer worried about all the people in the room. They are focused on Jesus and him alone. Can you remember, I spent a little bit of time this week remembering back to pre-junior high, junior high, high school. Were we not all just incredibly insecure in those days? I mean, we're all just trying to figure it out. We're all just, and my mom was here first service, and so we had some fun conversations about this. She dressed me up for junior high in clothes that she made, and the shorts and the shirts all matched. In my home, we got to go to the fabric store. Do you remember these things? And they always had these clearance ones. And that's what we shopped. We picked out our outfits. In summer clothes, 3 different outfits, and they were awesome. They matched. My friends thought they were awesome because they always commented on my clothes. It was just a gig. I didn't feel all horrible about it, but I remember people kind of just the little jibes that you make. And I remember my response to that was sort of asking this question. I want to pose it for us because I think it invites us into the freedom on the other side of seeing Jesus, how Mary saw Jesus at this party. And so here's the question that I oftentimes try to answer in my own life. Is there anything powerful enough to cause me to stop thinking about what other people are thinking about when they think about me? Is there anything powerful in the room that would cause me to stop thinking about what you all think of me or what you all think about when you think about me? What is that thing? Mary seemed to get past it. And I'll tell you, when I was young, there was a couple of tacks that I've taken. I still hit repeat on these all the time. The first one was this. I just don't want people to think anything. Maybe you were a kid like me. You're like, I'm just going to hide. Some of you go big. You light your hair on fire. I knew this day was coming, knew my hair was precious, kept the hair on. I just hid in a group. I didn't want anyone to know me. I didn't want them to say me. This was incredibly difficult when it came to that weird and super awkward dating phase. Because I hadn't yet talked to anyone. And so it was just kind of hard working and navigating through that. But this is a tact I think we take. I'm just going to hide. If no one knows me, then I have a pretty decent answer to the first question. Now, the challenge with it, of course, is when you get older, you realize everybody has opinions. And I can remember still going out for sophomore basketball and...
Thanks so much for joining us, church. We hope that you enjoyed this message. To find more messages like this, or to see where you can get connected or to give financially, please visit sierrabible.com.